Good afternoon. Wake up. I know y'all are always just. Um, anyway, I hope you're doing well. And want to get into a little bit of World War One today. And we talked about leading up to it yesterday. This is on page 311. I'm going to get you to read, if you will, read it, know the material. 311 through 316. Now, there are a lot of pictures in there, so it's not a lot of reading. It sounds a lot worse than it is, but 311 through 316. But I want to go through a couple of things real quick about World War One. Notice you've got Germany kind of here in the middle. You've got France on one side and Russia on the other side. And Germany thought, hey, we'll do this fairly quickly. They had a general named Schlieffen, who several years earlier had devised the Schlieffen Plan, just in case Germany ever had to do something like this. Yeah. And what they would do is they would go through Belgium and attack Paris, because if you are familiar with the map of France, Paris is in the upper part of France. And they would go through Belgium and attack Paris. And as soon as they had defeated the French, then they would hustle back through Belgium, through Germany, and meet the Russians on the other side of Germany, because they figured it would take Russia a while to get there, to get set up, to get mobilized. Well, that would have worked fairly well if Belgium hadn't said, no, we don't want you walking through here, because they didn't want to attack Belgium. They just wanted to walk through. Hey, guys, can we motor through your country? And Belgium said no. So the Germany's troops did what Germans often do. They were like, well, hey, we're going anyway. And they went. And as a result of going through, by the way, they attacked Paris, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But Belgium, because they had had this happen to them, it draws another entangled alliance in. Do you remember who was allied with Belgium? Great Britain, England. And so that draws them into the war. Something dumb like this on the Germans' part caused England to come into the war. And it's all again because of these alliances and because of these treaties and because, hey, I've got your back if. And that's exactly how Great Britain gets drawn in. Anyway, the Germans attack France, and France helps stop the advance outside of Paris. One of the cool things, and your book mentions this, and it's one of the neat, it shows how war changes over the years. Civil War, you've got railroads coming into being. They were big during this time. Taxicabs brought troops to the front as they fought off the Germans outside of Paris. So pretty neat stuff there. But anyway, British forces showed up. They helped the French, and they kind of entrenched there. And we'll talk about trenches in just a moment. The Russians got their act together fairly quickly, and the Germans were surprised by the Russian army. And the thing was, the Russian army was not that powerful, come to find out. The Germans beat them back fairly quickly. And this is where we get into the tough part of the war, this entrenchment. Stalemate is the word your book uses. But basically, the troops dug into trenches. And they would fight for just a few square feet of property. It wasn't like in the Civil War, you fight a battle here for a couple of days and one of the armies retreat and you move on. They entrenched. They weren't giving up their property. And so they dug literal trenches everywhere. In fact, they dug them from the English Channel all the way to Switzerland. Trenches all the way through there. Now, the thing about trench warfare, it was scary, because you're down in the trench, and we watched videos about this before spring break. You're down in the trench, and you hear the whistle of a... You don't know where it's going to hit. If you get out of the trench, you get shot at. If your head looks up above the trench, you may get shot. Once you get out, there's usually barbed wire or some kind of barricade that you have to climb over. You're out in the open. It was just a scary thing. There was disease. It was nasty. Not a great way to fight warfare. But a stalemate pursues. And in 1916, at the Somme River, 4 months of fighting cost the British 600,000 men in 4 months. 600,000 men. That is a large chunk of British population. And one of the reasons this war was so costly in lives, and we'll talk about the number of lives lost later on, all of these new things. Machine guns. This is where we start to see machine guns used in warfare. Flamethrowers. It looks so cool. I mean, and you torch stuff. The only problem is if the fuel pack gets hit with a bullet, you're going to blow up, go up like a rocket. But the flamethrowers were utilized during this war. And one of the big things, they would fill shells with poisonous gas. Poisonous gas was so bad that Adolf Hitler, who was in World War I, he saw the effects of poisonous gas. He wouldn't even use it during World War II. It was horrible stuff. And the thing about it, once it landed, where's it going to drift? You've got wind, you've got atmospheric conditions. This stuff could drift for miles and affect communities that weren't even fighting in the war. And a lot of people died. A lot of people got burns. And not just a death, but like an agonizing, horrible death where you couldn't breathe. It was terrible stuff. The British invented the tank. Now, the British tanks were pretty good, and they would roll over trenches and around trenches and roll over the barricades. Pretty cool stuff. The only problem is the Germans developed their own. Other things that were used in this war. You had Zeppelins. Now, the Goodyear blimp is a Zeppelin. You're familiar with Zeppelins. But they could fly over, and they would bomb civilian areas of England. So these Zeppelins could fly high enough that they're out of gunshot range, anti-aircraft range, because anti-aircraft was something not really thought of too much. And they would fly over and they would bomb civilian areas of England. So civilians got drug into this war. You had the British Navy, the biggest navy in the world, but you had the German submarines that could sneak up and blow a ship up from underneath the water. So a lot of things were going on. And one of the big things that came during the war was airplanes. Now, airplanes started out as much like the hot air balloons were used in the Civil War to monitor troop movements. You can get a good visual of what troops are doing by looking down from the air. But later on, they strapped guns to them. They would have dogfights with them where they would, shoot at each other in the air, and they started dropping bombs out of them. So it was a major, major thing, and it became a total war. And that means that all of the resources of a country were used to fight the war. The factories were cranking out bullets and guns and combat boots and uniforms and medical supplies. It was a major, major event. Civilian deaths from famine, disease, poisonous gas, attacks, bombs, all of those things climbed into the millions. So you imagine you're sitting at your house minding your own business and something happens to you, or your country is in a famine because of this war. Millions died. And by the way, when Russia lost, and let me backtrack just a little bit, when Russia lost against Germany, basically Germany pushed them back into Russia. But they still had to leave some German troops on the Russian border to make sure, hey, y'all aren't going anywhere. And so that's what they did until Vladimir Lenin. Vladimir Lenin in 1918 signed a treaty. He was the new Russian leader. Came about in 1917, communist. And he took Germany out of the war. So anyway, because of this, and because the Germans had sank a couple of ships, America finally gets in. We had kind of just laid to the side for a few years. But in 1917, April the 6th, 1917, America got into the war. We sent 250,000 troops to France every month. 250,000 troops to France every month. And when we talk about this total war effort and the patriotism of it, I want you to look at the posters on page 314. pretty cool stuff, but it shows you kind of the attitude. A lot of people call it propaganda, but it's saying, hey, we're a part of this battle. The war led to the millions, deaths of millions. The Germans finally signed an armistice. It was a ceasefire. It wasn't a surrender. It was just a ceasefire. And it's all negotiated in Paris in 1919. And the Treaty of Versailles took place. And the Treaty of Versailles, Germany thought, hey, they'll treat us fairly well because we signed a ceasefire. They did not. Germany, their military capabilities were really, really pushed down. They were expected to repay for the damages. This is going to cause a lot of economic problems for the world during the 1920s. A lot of major problems for the world. But that's going to happen. The Germans were really, they had it put it to them after the end of World War I. 10 million men died in battle. 26 million were wounded or missing in action. And about 15,000 people died every day of the war. The war cost about $350 billion, which in today's terms, I mean, when you're looking at a $2.5 trillion Senate bill that's perhaps has already gone through, I don't know, I haven't watched the news in a little bit. $350 billion is not that much, but at that time, and to me it's still a lot. But and people thought after this, hey, this is the war to end all wars. It's never going to happen again. But if you have your Bible, you can look in Matthew 24, 6 and 7. War will always remain. It's part of humanity, or lack of humanity, I guess you would say. It's the human experience until he comes back. So keep that in mind. If you will, answer the section quiz questions 1 through 6. Don't worry about the star. We may tackle the star tomorrow. It's a pretty good one, but just want you to answer 1 through 6. You don't have to write the questions, but if you'll submit them in that little box to the right. Hope you're doing well, and again, I miss y'all. The president today said hopefully things will get back to normal soon. We'll keep praying that it does.